morning, everyone. Good morning. Unfortunately, we're having a little video technical difficulties here getting the video working for streaming online, but you all can see me and hear me just fine, so we'll muddle through it. So this morning we're going to finish Ephesians. This is the last Sunday in the quarter, so next Sunday will be a new quarter. So today we'll cover Ephesians 6, and next week we will have our associate minister candidate, Rich Gold, and his family, Whitney and Dominic and Jordan, will be joining us. So Rich will teach here in this class, whatever he wants to teach. We're not telling him what to teach, so let him teach whatever he wants to teach. And we will be inviting any adults that want to join us. So the team's probably going to reconfigure the room just a little bit differently so that we can fit more people in here than normal. So when you come in next week, it may look a little different. All the other classes are going to go as normal. We're not canceling any other classes, but just inviting everyone who wants to join us in here and here. This probably doesn't apply to you, but since you're all here right now. But also we encourage people to be here, a little early or on time at least, because if it gets too full in here, we might have to kind of ask people to go to other classes because it just may be too full. So we'll kind of see how that goes. But Rich will be teaching for us next week, and then he'll also be preaching during class. Or worship, sorry. And then also this Saturday, we're going to have a men's prayer breakfast at 9 a.m. here in the family room, where Rich is going to speak to us a little bit as well. So all the men are invited to that, all the boys are invited to that, everybody, any males invited to that to come and join us then. And then February 11th, the second Sunday of the quarter, Zach and Kevin Appleby, Zach Daly, Kevin Appleby are going to start a new class. Tell us just a little bit about it. I know it's in the bulletin, but.
So this class is titled Strangers in a Strange Land. And it's a little bit about how we're called to live in the world but not be of the world. And about how we can keep our true home in mind as we go through this life.
Yeah, looking forward to that. So this morning as we dive into Ephesians 6, obviously this is another one of those areas where it's obvious that the chapters and verses were added long after these books were written, because chapter 6 kind of starts in the middle of what Paul's talking about, where he's talking about families and how families work together, how in the church, and how we treat one another. And so I just kind of wanted to sum up a little bit and kind of point out a couple things as we move into this. So in the first verses before this, verses 21 through the end of the chapter there, 33, Paul has been talking to husbands and wives, but he's really talking to all family members, right? And just one key thing that I want to point out, a couple key things, but first thing I want to point out is unity in the church, in our families, in our marriages. Unity comes through submission. That is the church's, that is God's way of creating unity, is we submit to one another, right? We don't try to force unity. We don't try to all think the same and believe that that's not how it works. We have to submit to one another. That's the main ingredient, I would say. There's other things, obviously, that add to that and make it work. But submission is the way it works. And that's one of the reasons why, Christ led the example for his apostles by saying, don't lord it over, right, your people. Yes, you're going to be leaders in the church, but don't lord it over with authority. Submit, right? Serve. Wash feet. Okay? So this is how we form unity in the church, is through submission to one another. Making others more important than ourselves. And so, of course, Paul takes that into the marriage, into the family. But obviously, he talks, this is, by the way, what Christ did for us, right? Christ submitted himself to God's authority, to the plan of salvation, submitted himself all the way to death on a cross. Okay? So Christ gives us that example of what that looks like to put others above ourselves. And the last verse of chapter 5, I think, is really important. There's a whole book that's been written on this, and a series of marital kind of tools and whatnot. But in that verse it says, each one of you must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Research will bear out that the number one need that a man has in a relationship, especially a romantic relationship, is respect. Men need respect. We want it. It's something men will stay in a loveless marriage as long as they're respected, much longer than they'll stay in a marriage where they don't feel respected by their spouse. That's weird. Men need love too, right? It's not that men don't need love, but they need respect above all. Okay? That's interesting because women need love, right? Now these are vast generalizations. I get that, right? We're all different people, but these are vast generalizations. But overall, it's very true. Women need love. Okay? Respect isn't quite as important for a woman as it is for men. Okay? So that gets us in trouble though if we don't understand that about one another, right? Because a lot of things that husbands do for their wives aren't very loving. And when a husband starts to feel not respected, a husband might not act very loving towards his wife. And then the wife may not respect their husband very well. And next thing you know, as they talk, the book I'm referring to is Love and Respect. Great book. I've used it in many marital counseling sessions and whatnot, and recommended it to a lot of marriages. We get in a bad cycle, right? And so we talk about unconditional love. Do we talk about unconditional respect? No, we talk about earning respect, right? But we don't make people earn love. It's very interesting. So, something to think about. Obviously, men need to be respectful to gain respect, but women, we don't say, well, you got to earn love, right? You got to earn my love. We give love unconditionally. So, in the book, they challenge us to think about maybe giving respect unconditionally as well in marriage, and maybe that will help the relationship move forward. Yes, Dale, or at least not get in that bad cycle.
Yeah, relationships. This morning, Jack was driving her hair, and I said, well, this is opportune time. Let's give her a kiss on the cheek. I lean that way, she said, oh, no.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to realize,
Yeah. This made a big difference in my marriage because there were a lot of times when I was very upset with Kara that I didn't understand why I was upset, and I finally figured out it was because I felt disrespected. It's because I didn't feel like she was respecting me in the moment, right? And that was a me problem. I needed to fix myself a little bit, obviously. But be able to communicate that to her and say, hey, here's why I reacted the way I did, right? And here's how you can help me, be a better husband is by, talking to me in this way instead of this way. Anyway, it really helped our marriage and for me to understand why I was getting as upset. Because I don't think this is something we really teach. But we don't have time for that because we've got to get into Ephesians chapter 6. But I just wanted to point that out. If you want to learn more about that, again, the book Love and Respect, I highly recommend it for marriages. It's a great book, really keys in. And this is obviously the verse that they really key in as their theme verse. All right, so Paul's going to talk here, move from marriages and from church and the Christ and the church, to talk about children relationships with their parents. He's going to talk about then masters and slaves, and then he's going to move into the armor of God. So that's kind of the big three things we'll talk about this morning. So let's read the first three verses of Ephesians chapter 6. Would someone mind reading verses 1 through 3?
I can read it.
Thank you.
Children, obey your parents in the Lord because this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may have a long life in the land. That was just one.
Yeah, just one. Yeah. I want to highlight this verse. So Paul told everyone to submit to one another in chapter 5, right? And specifically, he gets into husbands and wives doing that, loving, submitting, respecting, all of that. But here, he changes his verb. And here, children are not commanded to submit, they're commanded to obey. Okay? And there is a difference between that, right? Because there's an authority now that's in place of this. And it's going to be the same verb he's going to use for slaves and masters, right? Slaves are to obey. Not submit, obey. Submission is a voluntary thing, right? No one submits you, you submit yourself. But here Paul says children are supposed to obey, right? Because there's an authority figure in their life, their parents. So, what two reasons does Paul give for why children should obey? Okay, so it's a command, but it's a command with a promise, right? Paul doesn't just say, hey, because this is a command. He says it's a command that comes with a promise. What is that promise?
It'll go well. And you'll have a long life.
Yeah. And he says, in fact, it's the first command that God ever gave that had a promise with it. If you do this, this will happen. What was God making that promise? What is happening here? Why do you think God gives this command a promise? Any ideas? Any thoughts?
You receive a blessing for doing that from God.
Okay.
You live a long life, and I don't know if that's necessary time-wise. I think my part of that is that you live a good life with so many blessings from your children.
Okay. So So you think do you think the blessing is for the parents? Is that what you're, or
The parents receive blessings from the children obeying them,
okay?
honoring them. It's just the same thing as when we honor and glorify God. We receive so many blessings from that.
Okay. Yeah, it could be that this blessing isn't just for the children, that it's for the whole family, right? That this is something that when this happens, when children are obedient to parents, and we're going to see the reverse of that, what he was going to say to fathers in a second, that it's a blessing to the whole family, right? And ultimately to the larger nation, right? Okay. What else do y'all think about this promise that God made and Paul reiterates here?
Big one?
Yeah.
So right,
I'm sorry?
righteousness.
Yes, that's the other reason. That's the second reason. Yep. But right now I want to talk about the promise. Why does God make this promise that it will go well with you if children obey?
Well, right, deliver. Parents know what's best for their children.
Okay. What's that?
You'll live a long life.
Okay.
It prepares you to submit in general
Uh-huh.
in your community. Because you have to work in the community. You're going to have a boss at work. You're going to have people who are of higher status making decisions that affect you. So you have to learn that it's not all about you.
Yeah. What is the first relationship where we learn obedience in? It's in our relationship to our parents, right? It's the very first, in fact, that's probably the most significant relationship that we learn obedience. And if a child doesn't learn obedience as a child, what does that child become? A disobedient adult, right? An adult who doesn't know how to obey, right? An adult who doesn't know how to obey the rules and the laws causes chaos, causes harm, causes hurt in the community, right? And so I don't think this is just God saying, hey, if you do this, I'm going to give you blessings. I think God is saying, this is how we create obedient adults, right? Is by learning in that very initial relationship with your parents how to obey them. And you learn that skill and that ability. And you learn to do that, and it helps you further in life. Dennis?
I think it's very important that very first phrase, verse 1.
Okay.
In the Lord.
In the Lord, yeah.
That's a command for us parents. Be careful how I direct my children. That I direct them in the Lord.
Yes. Absolutely.
And
We learn from consent. How you still consent when you don't obey.
Okay. Go ahead, Dennis. Finish.
it's just important for us to realize my children are not to just obey parents irresponsibly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we parents have a part in that. And oftentimes parents do demand that their children obey them in things that are not right.
Yes.
Children have to make a decision, and that's hard.
Yes.
And so we as Christian parents, especially, the world's going to do what it does. But we as godly parents need to listen to that very first phrase.
Absolutely.
The honor also includes some responsibility, and Jesus talked about that when you were saying, yeah, you're not honoring your parents because the
Yes.
things you were supposed to do for them.
Yeah.
The leaders were letting them commit that as a pledge instead of helping their parents. So it's not just
little children,
right.
and not just obeying. Absolutely. Yeah, so he's referring to when Jesus says, you give the korban, you give what you should be giving to your parents to support them, you're pledging it to God, right? You're giving it to God as a sacrifice. And the leaders are saying, that's okay, as long as you do that, you can neglect your parents. And that's not honoring your parents. So first of all, that lets us know that this is not just about little kids, right? Children, we're always a child to our parents. And so if there are ways that we should honor and support them, we should do that. But it also, like you're saying, it's more than just obedience. It is care and concern and taking care of them as well. Yeah. Go ahead, Dennis.
And I think
And then
it's
Lottie.
very important along with what Bill was saying. It's not a matter of long years.
Okay.
I'm sure you've run into this sometimes. When a child dies, what did it do? Why didn't it live very long? And the days that we live, if we're respectful and honorable, will be long. Not necessarily longevity as years.
Yes. Well, So this is also where we take promises, if we take them very individualistically, or if we take them as they're meant for the community, right? And so it's not going to be true 100% of the time, every time individualistically, but it's going to be true overall for the community. Lottie?
Oh, I was just gonna say that, there's no saying that many times children learn from what they live.
Yeah.
And so when children are born, they are born with great potentials. And it's up to the parents then to write on that slate what they want for the children as they grow up. And if children learn to obey their parents, then they learn to submit to authority, submit to the Lord. And,
Absolutely.
So it's important
Absolutely.
that they learn that when they're children.
This is what God meant for us, is to, in this child-parent relationship, to learn obedience so that we will become obedient people later on. So the two reasons he gives is it's righteous, okay? So the child has an obligation, it's righteousness. It's righteous to obey, but also this promise that God has made for us to honor our parents. In the Old Testament, this came with a high price. If you were disobedient and dishonorable and shamed your parents could take you out and stone you, right? The community would punish you for that. All right, let's move on to fathers. Just one verse here in verse 4. I'll just go ahead and read it. So this is the inverse of this. So fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. And I'll just point out what Dennis already pointed out is children obey in the Lord. Now fathers are supposed to instruct in the Lord. He's going to say the same thing to slaves and masters. Okay, it's all about your relationship to God. So we'll point that out for sure. So what did Paul mean by do not exasperate? What does that mean? I don't use that word very often.
Don't
But,
guess at everything.
I'm sorry, you have to say that again.
Don't guess at what they're doing wrong. Just don't doubt it.
Don't guess at what they're doing wrong?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Someone else?
Exaggerate means.
Well, it's exasperate, not exaggerate.
Oh,
What do you say?
My bride has a story she tells many, many times. In that story, she had to clip around the driveway, and she had done it to the best of her ability. And her father came out and said to her, "Do it all over again." She didn't do it well enough. That's exasperating the child.
Okay.
And
Okay.
some translations say do not provoke
Yes.
your children.
Yes, provoke. So we're talking about creating anger, right? Creating resentment in another person through the way we treat them, right? That's what exasperate means. So you can, anything that now, sometimes I punish my kid and they get angry with me. Does that mean I can't punish them? No. We're talking about a habitual, right, exasperating your child. Constantly angering them, constantly bringing up resentment in them, the way we treat them, okay? So this is a father. Now let me ask, why does he say it only to fathers? Why do mothers get to exasperate their kids? Is that what he means? You all get to do that?
Many times when it says fathers, it means parents.
True.
talking.
True. But he does specifically speak to fathers here.
Fathers are the head of the household.
Okay.
I think he's saying you can use a lot of definitions for exasperate, but I think he's also telling don't confuse your children. Like Dennis was talking about earlier, you can't teach them the way of the world and the way of the Lord.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So exasperating our children is the negative thing that we can do, right? That he's saying don't do. But the positive thing is the next thing he says, and this is my next question, but we'll go ahead and put it up there. The positive command is instruct and bring them up, right? In the admonition of the Lord. Any other reasons why you think though that he may be only speaking to fathers?
I think maybe fathers are just more susceptible to it.
Okay. I would agree with you. I know in my family, I can tell you in my context, in my family, the one who exasperates the kids the most is me. I'll be honest. It's me. I'm the one who gets impatient faster. I'm the one who frustrates with them. My wife is much more patient. Now, is that always the case? No. But I think fathers are also the disciplinarians, and especially in this context, right? And so I think we are talking about discipline for the most part as well. Yes.
Consistent.
Yes. Okay. Consistent. Yeah.
That, in inconsistency really.
Absolutely.
has to be filled.
Absolutely.
It's important to remember, he says, the fathers, he doesn't say, and not mothers.
Yes. Yeah.
I think mothers are included. Fathers,
Absolutely.
you have a first responsibility.
Yes.
I had a dear friend one time that she was a member of the church, he wasn't. And it was his responsibility to provide for him physically. It was his wife's responsibility to teach them spiritual matters. They lived in the country, and one day he walked up on his two boys when they were teenagers, and they'd gotten a Jeep, high center, and stuck. And he just walked up on them, and they were calling that Jeep everything they could call it. And he said, what could I say? All they were doing was quoting me.
Yeah.
And he became a Christian and later became an elder. But he realized he had to set this an example.
I would argue, that Paul puts the responsibility for leading the family in chapter 5 on the husband. So now he's putting the responsibility for instructing the kids. Does that mean the mom is not part of it? Absolutely not. Of course the mom is part of it. Of course not. But the and here's the thing. I think as fathers, a lot of fathers across the board in the church have dropped the ball on this. I think we have advocated that over to our wives and said, okay, you're going to be the one doing this. And we're not actively involved as we should be in that. Now, that's all I'll say about that. But the positive command is to bring them up. And here's the thing. This word has a nurturing or nourishing connotation to it. Okay? This is the same word you would use for raising a plant. Okay? Right? If you're going to raise a plant, you've got to give it the nourishment it needs. You've got to feed it. Okay? You've got to make sure it has what it needs. Right? You don't yell at it and scream at it. You take care of it. Right? This is the same idea here. Okay? So the connotation here is nurturing and nourishing this child in the training instruction of the Lord. Right? This is the food that we're supposed to be feeding them on a regular basis. And I like what a lot of y'all said. We can't do that. Teach them the ways of the world and the ways of God. Right? We got to be consistent. A lot of other things. All right, I see a couple of hands.
This good little Jimmy family that didn't have a cell phone doesn't mean my family needs a cell phone.
All right. Was there another hand back there? No? Okay. That's another hand. All right.
In the lyrics of the song "Cats in the Cradle," everyone know that song? Or know
Great
some
song.
lyrics in that? The son grows up just like the father. He doesn't spend any time with him or anything like that. I think it's an awesome song. Those lyrics to that tell us a lot how fathers need to focus on loving when they discipline, to love their child when they discipline. So,
What we see here, though, in these first 4 verses is this reciprocal relationship, right? The children have responsibilities, the fathers, the parents have responsibilities, right? And so it's not one or the other, it's both. And if they're working in unison and doing both holding up their end of the bargain, then you're going to have a healthy family. You're going to have, okay? And he's going to do the same thing as we move into slaves and masters. It's the exact same thing, right? This is a reciprocal relationship. I need to move on. All right, verses 5 through 9. Yes. Okay, you told me I could tell you no when I can, but now you're not letting me.
I just didn't listen.
Okay, go ahead.
And it's important, because that's what's wrong today, is too many families don't have daddy in the picture.
Sure, absolutely. All right, let's read verses 5 through 9. Would someone read verses 5 through 9 of Ephesians chapter 6?
Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but like slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not men, because you know the Lord will reward everyone for whatever good he does, whether he is a slave or free. The masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him.
All right. Let me just throw this out there. Why would Paul feel the need to address slaves and masters in the church?
Because there were slaves and masters.
Because there were slaves and masters in the church, right? This is just a fact we have to accept, right? That at this time, right, there were going to be probably more slaves, right? Because we do know that the poor and those were the ones who were coming into the kingdom much faster than the rich and powerful, right? So most likely a lot more slaves, but there were both in the church. And you could even have a scenario where a master and slave in that relationship. We're in the same church together. And now Paul's saying, okay, that relationship doesn't go away, but it does change. It absolutely changes. And I've said this before from the pulpit, we cannot judge slavery at this time through the lens of American slavery, modern slavery. We just can't. It's not the same thing. It's similar. There were similarities in the sense that, you know, another person worked for another person, but there were so many differences. And especially the way God tried to set it up for his people. And I say try because they didn't always follow his rules, right, for how this was supposed to work. But it was not supposed to be such an exploitative, race-based, you know, kind of endeavor. And so when we look at this, we can't do that, look through the lens of American or modern slavery, okay? And slavery still occurs today. But what Paul's saying here is, you know, you may still be in that relationship now, but that relationship has now changed because you're a Christian. So how did Paul expect a Christian slave to obey now? Yes?
Well, he looked at Paul's trying to say to people in the church, and the master is Jesus. We're supposed to obey Jesus to do his commandments and live right as a slave.
Okay.
That's what Paul was trying to teach them.
Yeah. So they still have to obey their earthly masters, but they do it as if they're serving Christ. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay? So now, instead of just, oh, I serve Bob, now whatever I do for Bob, I need to think, I'm doing this for Christ. Right?
So it's all about positions too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been talking about husband, wife, children. You're in a position.
Yeah.
You may not have had any say so being in that position, especially as a child or a slave.
Yeah.
That you just accept it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're supposed to do in your position.
Yeah. Paul, we know, sent Onesimus back to Philemon, right? He didn't say, okay, now that you're a Christian, you don't have to be a slave anymore. He said, look, this is the position you're in. You should go back to your master, right? But that relationship has drastically changed now because you're both Christian. Because you're both followers of Christ, the master and slave relationship has completely changed. It hasn't gone away. The roles haven't changed, but the way we treat each other. How else do you see Paul saying here a Christian slave should obey?
Respect, sincerity of heart.
All right. Yeah, sincerity of heart. What do you think that means? What does that mean to you?
You are doing it, I wouldn't say joyfully, but you're doing it with a sense of purpose and
Yeah.
commitment.
Yeah. Well, he does say later on, a lot of translations say wholeheartedly. The word there is enthusiastically. So, with goodwill, right? So maybe joyfully is not too far off for what Paul is saying here, right? Okay. What does he say not to do? Well, what's the negative way of saying not sincere or being sincere?
Eye service.
Yeah. You don't just do it when they're looking, right? Okay, I'm a great slave when they're around and they're looking at me, but as soon as their back is turned, as soon as they're gone, I do whatever I want, right? And we've all known employees like that. We've all known, you know, employers like that. We've all known people who they only do what they do when someone's watching or when someone's looking, when they can get something out of it, when it can gain them, and when no one's around and they're not going to get any credit, you know, they're done, right? We've seen lots of people like that in our lives. And Paul says that's not how it works now. Now you are to be, we go back to consistent, you're to be consistent, right? You're supposed to work as if you're working for the Lord. Is the Lord ever going to turn his back and not look? No. Your earthly master may. The Lord's never going to turn his back and not look at you, right? He's not, and this is not a, you know, Santa Claus is always watching kind of thing. It's just, that's never going to happen, right? The Lord's eye is always on us. And so we should. Now, interestingly enough, what's the first couple words he uses? Obey your earthly masters with what? Respect and fear. You mentioned that. I want to point out the fact that that's the words fear and trembling that we most often see in other words, in other places like Philippians 2, we see it translated fear and trembling. It's the exact same words, right? We're to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. Paul uses this phrase multiple times, about 4 times, I think, in his letters. And every time he uses these words, he's talking about a sense of you have an authority over you. and that authority is going to judge you. And so you live now understanding the authority that is over you and the fact that you're going to be held accountable. Right? This is what fear and trembling means, is that you are accountable. And so we live as if we understand and know that we're not the authority, and that authority is going to judge us someday for the things that we do. And that's what fear and trembling means. And it's clear as you read through the different places where Paul uses that phrase that that's exactly what he means by it. Okay? So slaves have this respect and fear for their masters. But ultimately, where does that fear and trembling, where is it supposed to be directed? To God, right? Because what does he say? We say verse 8, right? Because you know the Lord will reward you. Now, you may work for a master who doesn't reward you now. You may work for a master who doesn't take care of you as well, who doesn't see the hard work that you're putting in now that you are serving him as he's Christ. But understand that you have another master, and that master, God, is going to reward you for what you see. Now, what's really cool about that, okay? All right, sincerity of heart, we'll put these over. Let me get to that in just a second. So fear and trembling, sincerity of heart, he uses the same phrase for slaves in Colossians 3 as well. Okay, sincerity of heart. Right, this is with an honesty and an openness and I'm not doing this so that I can get something out of it. I'm now serving because I want to serve, and I'm serving as if I'm serving the Lord. Okay, so as they would obey Christ. Obeying as you would Christ, he says here, not to gain favor, right? So it's not selfishly, whether they're looking out, we've talked about these already. And here he says, do the will of God from your soul. I know in most translations it's going to say heart, but he doesn't use the same word for heart here. He uses the word for soul, right? Your psyche, not your cardia. Okay? I think that's a difference. I think Paul, so Paul he uses heart earlier, right? A sincere heart. Then he says, serve God, doing the will of God from your soul. And then he says, serve with enthusiasm. And our translations put heart in there in each one of those. But I think Paul is saying it's your whole being, right? It's your heart, your soul, your body, everything is in this, okay? So when you serve with all of your being and not just part. And so it's not it's a consistent and serving the Lord. And then enthusiastically with goodwill. Knowing the Lord will reward. Here's what I want to point out there. I love this phrasing here when he says, he said, he reminded slaves of God's impartiality, right? He said, God does not show favoritism. Why would that matter to a slave?
That they're going to be treated equally when their kingdom comes to them. They're not going to be a slave anymore to their master.
Exactly. They know that in this world, as a slave, they're not being treated the same by society, right? They're in a caste system. But that's not how the kingdom of God works. God does not have favoritism. He does not have castes and levels of citizenship in heaven. Everyone is treated the same. So he's saying he's going to look at you and judge you the same as he's going to look and judge your master, right? That's awesome. I think that's a huge thing for a slave. That's a very freeing thing, right? So God he's no respecter of persons, as Acts chapter 10, I love that translation. I think it's an older translation, but Acts chapter 10, verse 34, right? He's no respecter of persons. What that means is he doesn't care about your title. He doesn't care about your position. He doesn't care about any of that. None of that matters to him. He loves every one of us the same and judges every one of us the same. Right? But our lifestyle is no separator from God. Right? So no one can say to a slave, well, you're a second-class Christian. No, you're not. You have the same access to God every other Christian has. It's no different. Okay? But it's also no excuse for disobedience. Right? Well, I'm a Christian, right? So I don't have to be as good a slave anymore, or my master needs to treat me, right? It's also not an excuse for disobedience, neither. And then, of course, this is a reminder for Christian masters as well, isn't it? God does not show impartiality. He says the same thing to masters, right? They're to treat their slaves, understanding that they also have a master in heaven. And that master is going to hold them accountable in the same way. So that phrase there at the very beginning of verse 9, he told masters, do the same things. Okay? So he says, slaves, here's how you're supposed to act. And then he says, masters, do the exact same thing. Okay? No different. You now treat your slaves in a different way, as if you're serving the Lord, as if the Lord is your master, right? In the same way that your slave is now going to obey you, you are to treat your slaves in the same way. So what does he tell them not to do?
Right.
Yeah. He said, get rid of threats. Get rid of threats. Give up threats. Why? I mean, it's kind of obvious. I mean, it may be obvious for us as Christians, but why can't you threaten your slaves anymore? They work for you, right?
Well, you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself.
Okay.
So
All
I
right.
would not threaten myself.
Absolutely. Now, I think there's some parallel here to what he tells children and fathers, right? He tells the children to obey their parents. He tells slaves to obey their masters. And here he says, don't threaten, right? Just like he tells fathers, don't exasperate your children. You now care for these people, right? You don't look at them only as your objects for what you need to accomplish. They're more than just, objects to give you an end, right? They are people, and you are to treat them that way. And so you can't threaten them anymore because you now have to care for them and love them as a Christian master, right? And so it completely changes that relationship. And God is now the master of both of you, right? So you may say, well, I'm your master. Yeah, but we both serve the same master, right? Even if my slave's not a Christian, that doesn't matter, right? At the end of the day, we both have the same master. And then again, because God shows no favoritism, so we shouldn't either. All right, let's get into the armor of God before we run out of too much time here. Verses 10 through 17, if someone would read that. Not everybody wants.
Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything to stand, stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, make up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God.
All right. So Paul here says, finally, this is the beginning of the closing for Paul. So he's talked about us submitting. He's talked about the mystery of the gospel, how God is intending for everyone to be able to come into the kingdom, no matter what, especially Gentiles, of whom this church is mostly made of. And now he's saying, okay, finally, here's my last admonition to you. Okay, last couple of admonitions. And so this is all about finding strength in the Lord for the battle ahead. This is the realm that Paul is moving into. He loves using battle language. He's used it many times. We've seen it in 2 Corinthians quite a bit. And many times he uses this kind of language for the church and for him, because the verses 18 through 20 are about him. Now, that's me. I'm never going to look cooler than I look in that picture right there. All right? So, what I want to point out is those of us who have worn armor, okay, and that's modern armor. Okay, those of us who have worn armor, and I've never been in combat. I've never been in a combat situation, okay? So I've never had bullets flying at me. But I've known many who have, okay? When you have armor and you need armor, you care about your armor, okay? And I think this is one of the reasons, why I think this is kind of a hard analogy for some of us to understand, is because we've never worn armor. Armor isn't something we worry about, right? But when you have, it kind of changes you. I did a funeral for a Marine, 19-year-old Marine, who died in combat in Iraq, he was helping his teammate do something, and he took his helmet off, his Kevlar off, and the sniper got him as soon as he took his helmet off. And it just reminded me how important armor is, right? Armor is it is the difference between life and death in battle, okay? And that's when we read this, I know we go back to like when we were kids, like, oh, the armor of God, right? And think the sword, and it's cool, and it's, talk about armor and battle and the swords and stuff, but this is very serious what Paul's talking about. If he's talking about armor, he's talking about a serious battle where there are consequences that if you don't put this on, you're not going to be there. So what were the reasons Paul gave for donning God's armor right off the bat? We are in spiritual warfare. Absolutely.
Where for protection?
For protection. What's that? Okay. Keep Jesus strong in your heart. Okay. Okay. All right. He specifically says here, first of all, to take a stand against the devil's schemes, right? So, and we can think schemes here as the devil's got an agenda, he's got a strategy, right? He's coming for us. And so we better prepare ourselves. That's why you put on armor, right? You put on armor to do that. And so we've got to understand the devil's got schemes against us. And then as was pointed out, there's a spiritual warfare going on. We fight against these rulers, authorities, powers, and spiritual forces of evil. These are not flesh and blood. This is not humans. This is some kind of spiritual forces that Paul believed, right? He uses phrases like this many times. We've already pointed it out in Ephesians what this means. But there is definitely a spiritual battle going on. So we have to have spiritual armor. But I love what he says where he says not just to fight. It's not just about being able to fight, but it's when the fight is over, what do you need to be able to do?
Stand.
Continue to stand, right? That when the fight is over, you're still there. So when the dust clears, right, you're still there, faithful, standing, ready for God. And I think that means what he's pointing to is on the judgment day, you are still able to stand firm. Okay? If you want that, Paul says, then you better think about these things. Put on this armor. Okay? All right. So the belt of truth. The word belt isn't there. It's gird your loins, and I've used this image before, telling how men would gird their loins, okay, and pulling up your robe and tying it and cinching it around your waist in a way that you could then go to battle. Okay, so basically turned your robe into shorts, and this is what they would do, right? Now professional soldiers might change completely into different armor. But, your average person who has to go to battle has to gird their loins. And so the belt of truth is what keeps that all together, what cinches that all up. And this is, in many ways, this is a quote from Isaiah 11:5, right? The branch of Jesse, right? The stump of Jesse is going to produce a branch, okay? And that branch ultimately is Jesus, right? And it says that one of the things he's going to do is he's going to wear the belt of righteousness. And so, a little bit different than the belt of truth, but in fact, almost all of these are quotes from Isaiah. So when he gets to the breastplate of righteousness, same thing. This is a big passage here, but I think it's important. So Isaiah 59 says, "The Lord looked and was displeased that there was no justice, and he saw there was no one, and he was appalled that there was no one to intervene." All right, so God is looking to his nation and saying, things are so messed up, but none of you are doing anything about it. Why are the leaders not doing anything? Why are the shepherds not doing anything? Right? Why is no one intervening and doing something about the injustice that I'm seeing in my own people? And so he says, so his own arm achieves salvation for him. So God says, okay, I've got to act. And his own righteousness sustained him, and he put on righteousness as his breastplate, and the helmet of salvation on his head, and he put on the garments of vengeance, and wrapped himself in zeal as in a cloak. So we see the same kind of imagery here. God is getting ready to go to battle. And this time to battle with his own people, because there's injustice among them, and no one's doing anything about it. And so God puts on his armor to prepare for battle, right? And Paul plays off of all that imagery in Isaiah, this armor and battle imagery, to say, we've got to join God in that battle, right? We've got to be with him. God's put on his armor, we need to join him, right? So we got the sandals of readiness. This sounds so much like Isaiah 52:7, right? How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news, who proclaim peace, who bring good tidings, who proclaim salvation, who say to Zion, your God reigns. So we both have both the good news and the peace, right? Be coming on feet. The shield of faith. Now, the shield is nowhere really in Isaiah, but it's all throughout. You can't hardly go anywhere in the Old Testament without talking God as our shield, our strong tower, our Savior, right? His shield is used all over. That imagery is used all over. But Paul specifically uses the word for these tower shields, these big door shields that the Roman army used. Okay, and I've pointed this out before in the pulpit, but those shields were meant not just to protect you, but you could link them together as they are here, right? And you would form together in a formation, and if everyone had their shield in the right place, you're pretty much impenetrable, right? The arrows could rain down, and you were fine because you were covered. So it wasn't meant just to cover you, but to cover the person next to you or behind you, right? And so this idea of this shield is it's not just an individual thing. It's something that when we come together, we are even stronger. Just want to point that out. The helmet of salvation, we already read in Isaiah where that phrase comes from. And then the sword of the Spirit. The only offensive weapon we have is the sword of the Spirit, which is God's word. Now, and look, we could pick each one of these apart and talk about how faith acts like this. Right? I just wanted to, what is the overall point that Paul's making? That we've got to take on the things of God, right? These things have to really matter to us so much that if we were a soldier in battle, our armor mattered to us. It's got to matter the same way, okay? I used to hate going through exercises when we had to wear all of our stuff, right? Because it's uncomfortable, it's hot, you sweat all the time, right? Especially when we go into some kind of, where we have chemical, oh man, and you have to don the whole suit, right?
The mask
and all that. Oh my goodness.
See,
and I was like, when is this going to be over?
2
right?
hours
Because it
later.
wasn't real, right? It was an exercise. And
2 hours later.
and so I would hate having to put that stuff on. But if I was in a real battle, I don't think I'd feel that same way. I think I'd be very grateful for the stuff I was wearing, right? Because there were actual bullets flying at that time. So this has to matter to us. It has to be so important that these things are our priorities, that we're paying attention to them, we're putting them on and donning them every day. All right, we're already over time. Notice that at the end, Paul just exhorts the prayer. So he talks about armor, but then he talks about prayer. And here's the only thing I want you to take from this. So Paul says, put on your armor, but if you put on your armor and you stop paying attention and you're not alert, that armor doesn't do you any good, right? So Paul says, what does prayer do? It makes us alert. It helps us to stand watch, to stay alert and stay focused. So put on your armor and then also stay alert. Pay attention. Keep your situational awareness we talk about a lot, okay? And that's what prayer does for us. Prayer keeps us situationally aware of what's going on around us and what God is doing in our lives. And so Paul asks them to pray for each other, specifically pray for him as well, okay? And then Paul has a pretty standard greeting here at the end, mentioning Tychicus. All right. So we ran through a lot of that, but I hope that brought something to you. So please be prepared next week to be here for Rich. And what we want to do is we want to hear what you guys have to say, to get some feedback from you. So those of us who are on the search team, which here is me and Zach. That's it right now. Or Lene was no Lene.
Bill.
Oh yeah, Bill. I'm sorry, Bill. Bill Mack. He's also a shepherd, so I forget that sometimes. Bill, myself, and Zach are on the search team. When you guys hear Rich teach and preach next week and get to talk with him and his family, then we would like to get feedback from you, okay? So give us one of us a call or text us or catch us after church and talk to us, when that happens so that we can get that feedback so that we can then make our recommendation to the shepherds having heard what you guys have to say.